And I am really concerned that Donald Trump is so senile or off that he is not able to compute what he's saying.
Not only are the American people once again facing the very real threat of a painful and unnecessary government shutdown right before the holidays, thanks to Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and MAGA Republicans in the House, but Trump has taken the bad situation that he created and made it so much worse with a ridiculous, hypocritical, and impossible demand, and we have to talk about it. But before we do, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we have several things to talk about in this video, several clips to look at, and full disclosure, this is going to be the first of several videos on the looming government shutdown because there's a lot to talk about. But let's start with this. Trump has created a bad situation, and he's made it now next to impossible to resolve. What am I talking about? I'm talking about these two things here. So Trump on Truth Social says, if Republicans try to pass a clean continuing resolution, which is basically a stopgap measure to temporarily keep the government funded, without all of the Democrats' bells and whistles that will be so destructive to our country, all it will do after January 20th is bring the mess of the debt limit into the Trump administration rather than allowing it to take place in the Biden administration. Any Republican that would be so stupid as to do this should and will be primaried. Everything should be done and fully negotiated prior to my taking office on January 20th, 2025. Now, we will cover in a separate video the fact that Trump is now publicly threatening members of his own caucus if they don't accede to his impossible demands. We'll talk about that in a separate video. But I want you to focus instead on this idea that it's not enough to temporarily keep the government funded. We now have to increase the debt ceiling. And if you follow this channel, you know what the debt ceiling is. But just in case this is your first time on this channel, we will cover exactly what the debt ceiling is so you will understand how this is bad enough that he's made this bad situation and now he's made it next to impossible. Another statement to this effect that we have to examine. This is from J.D. Vance. Statement from Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. The most foolish and inept thing ever done by congressional Republicans was allowing our country to hit the debt ceiling in 2025. It was a mistake and now something that must be addressed. Meanwhile, Congress is considering a spending bill that would give sweetheart provisions for our government censors and for Liz Cheney. The bill would make it easier to hide the records of the corrupt January 6th committee, which accomplished nothing for the American people and hid security failures that happened that day. The bill would also give Congress a pay increase while many Americans are struggling this Christmas. Increasing the debt ceiling is not great, but we'd rather do it on Biden's watch. Democrats won't cooperate on the debt ceiling now. What makes anyone think they would do it in June during our administration? Let's have this debate now, and we should pass a streamlined spending bill that doesn't give Chuck Schumer and the Democrats everything they want. So, Republicans must get smart and tough. If Democrats threaten to shut down the government unless we give them everything they want, then call their bluff. It is Schumer and Biden who are holding up aid to our farmers and disaster relief. Okay. Now, obviously, that's all bullshit, because the current spending bill that Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and MAGA Republicans tanked that we discussed in a video yesterday, that was bipartisan. Both sides had agreed to it, and Trump let it happen for 2 weeks, let the negotiations happen. And then he and Elon Musk killed it in the 11th hour and then added this ridiculous demand about the debt ceiling on top of it. So it is 100%, not 99%, not 50-50, literally 100% the fault of Team MAGA. And Dan Goldman, a Democratic congressman that I've interviewed multiple times, he is just flabbergasted by the stupidity of this move. And we're going to play this clip, and then we'll unpack exactly what the debt ceiling is as a refresher so you can wrap your heads around the sheer stupidity and recklessness of this incoming administration.
He understands, at least he should, how these things work and how the debt ceiling works, which is a deadline in June. We are now up against the budget, the government shutting down on Friday, having nothing to do with the debt ceiling. And I am really concerned that Donald Trump is so senile or off that he is not able to compute what he's saying. And because it makes absolutely no sense to have an 11th hour demand to raise the debt ceiling on another president's watch when it doesn't need to be raised right now. If you're president for 4 years, you understand that's a non-starter. And I don't know whether this is a competency issue or this is bluster or what it is, but I am a little concerned that he would make this demand at this stage. I'm concerned about his mental capacity.
And the polls show that a majority of Americans felt that way. As you know, especially after President Biden stopped being the Democratic nominee, the polls show that more people had doubts about Trump's mental fitness than Vice President Kamala Harris, with respect to his age and competence and just mental fitness all the way around. So Dan Goldman is reflecting concerns shared by, depending on the poll, anywhere from 50 to 65% of the American people. It's pretty bad. Okay, now let's get into the debt limit. Okay. So this is from the New York Times. What is the debt limit? The debt limit is a cap on the total amount of money that the United States is authorized to borrow to fund the government and meet its financial obligations. Because the federal government runs budget deficits, meaning it spends more than it brings in through taxes and other revenue. And by the way, I will note that when Trump was president for the first 4 years, even before COVID, he ran massive, staggering budget deficits. He was not fiscally responsible by the conservative definition, even before COVID. So don't let anybody tell you otherwise. It must borrow huge sums of money to pay its bills. Those obligations include funding for social safety net programs, interest on the national debt, and salaries for members of the armed forces. So pretty important things. Approaching the debt ceiling often elicits calls by lawmakers to cut back on government spending. But lifting the debt limit does not actually authorize any new spending. In fact, it simply allows the United States to spend money on programs that have already been authorized by Congress. When will the debt limit be reached? After a protracted fight, lawmakers agreed in June 2023 to suspend the $31.4 trillion debt limit until January 1st, 2025. On that day, the limit would have to be increased by the amount of debt that had been incurred since the suspension, about $5 trillion. If it is not lifted or suspended again, the Treasury Secretary will then have to use extraordinary measures to ensure that the U.S. pays its bills, including interest payments to investors who have already bought government debt. Those payments are essential to preventing the U.S. from defaulting on its debt. It's not clear how long the Treasury Secretary will be able to use extraordinary measures, which temporarily curb certain government investments so that bills can continue to be paid. However, and this goes back to what Dan Goldman said, it's expected that the so-called X date would come sometime in the middle of next year, around June. Okay? So, with all that context, Trump either wants people to raise the debt ceiling on Biden's watch or get rid of it, which is interesting. So according to Garrett Haake, a reporter from NBC, Trump doesn't want to just lift the debt ceiling. He's keen to get rid of it, telling me in a phone interview, quote, the Democrats have said they want to get rid of it. If they want to get rid of it, I would lead the charge. He sees it as a fake thing, no real value regarding debt control. Senator Chris Murphy, a Democrat, responded to this. Trump wants to lift the debt ceiling for one reason and one reason only, so he can borrow shitloads of money to afford his new giant tax break for billionaires and corporations. In other words, saddle regular Americans with mountains more debt so the rich can get richer, which is true because if under the Biden administration we somehow expanded to, let's say, another $5 trillion or $10 trillion, then that means once it comes time for Donald Trump to pass his extremely expensive permanent tax cuts for the rich, those who need it the least, he won't have to then borrow additional money because the debt ceiling will have already been increased, presumably to cover that delta. Very cunning by Trump. Except it's not going to happen. There's no way. I mean, I would be stunned and I would be incredibly disappointed if the Democratic Party in the House and the Senate and President Biden, who would have to sign it into law, agreed to raise the debt ceiling on Biden's watch. And the reason I say that is because of Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans' own posture on the debt ceiling. And this is where the hypocrisy comes in. As Brian Krasenstein, a Democratic surrogate, has said on Twitter, 2 years ago, MAGA on X screamed, "Don't raise the debt ceiling for Biden." Last night, Trump posted, "Unless the Democrats terminate or substantially extend the debt ceiling now, I will fight till the end." So I'm sure you're all going to tear into Trump about this, right? Well, obviously not. And I've got a video to remind you because Trump is so shameless in his hypocrisy. As I said on Twitter, Democrats should close ranks and refuse to raise the debt ceiling. Make Trump do it after he takes office with his so-called landslide mandate. Remember, we've been hearing about that. The American people gave Donald Trump a mandate. Well, if they gave you so much of a mandate and it's reflected in the composition of Congress, then you all can do it since you'll control the White House, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, and you have a sympathetic Supreme Court. And again, the bigger problem by far is I don't want to reward Donald Trump and MAGA Republicans for their hypocrisy and bad faith. All that's going to do is incentivize them to continue to act like shitheads and use the debt ceiling to extort Democrats when Democrats are in power, but demanding that Democrats give them a blank check when they're in power. And Trump is shameless about this and transparent. This is from a 2023 CNN town hall on this very topic. Pay attention carefully to Trump's words.
save this country. Our country is dying. Our country is being destroyed by stupid people, by very stupid people.
You once said that using the debt ceiling as a negotiating wedge just could not happen. You said that when you were in the Oval Office.
That's when I was president.
So why is it different now that you're out of office?
Because now I'm not president.
And his supporters laughed and celebrated. By the way, this is what I mean when I say that MAGA hypocrisy is not a bug, it's a feature. It is one of the lifeblood of MAGA. MAGA could not function as a viable political movement if it weren't shamelessly, celebratorily hypocritical. They love it. They love that he's like, yeah, hold Democrats to one standard, hold yourself to a different standard, say and do whatever the hell you need to in order to win. Have one standard on Monday, have a different standard on Tuesday, grade yourselves and your allies on a curve, hold Democrats to the harshest possible standard, do so ruthlessly and with a smile. They don't give a shit. They don't. And perhaps some moderates and independents do, which is part of the reason why I'm conveying this to you all, because you should care. What's good for the goose is good for the gander. We should have one standard, one, for Democrats and Republicans, but Republicans feel like they can't win that way. Trump feels like he can't win that way. So what's he talking about? Well, when he was president, he and the Republicans wanted the debt ceiling to be raised multiple times, and it happened. Republicans were content to do it on Trump's watch. Yeah, whatever you need. Suspend it, raise it, whatever. We don't want the debt ceiling to get in the way of Donald Trump's agenda. Then when Trump lost the election and Democrats were in charge, and Democrats had to raise the debt ceiling on President Biden's watch to pay for debt racked up during Donald Trump's tenure, because remember, when Trump was president, he added $8 trillion to the debt. So when the debt ceiling was increased to pay for his spending, Republicans wanted to use it as a cudgel, right? Democrats have long criticized Republicans, this is from the same New York Times article, for playing dangerous games with the debt limit and called for it to be abolished. But it's not clear how willing they might be to let go of it as a potential source of leverage. Correct, and they shouldn't. They absolutely shouldn't. So Republicans are always reluctant to lift the debt limit, particularly when a Democrat is in the White House saying it enables runaway spending. GOP lawmakers regularly use it as a tool to extract concessions such as spending cuts from Democrats when they are in power. By addressing the debt limit during the final weeks of the Biden administration, Republicans could prevent Democrats from weaponizing it against them once they're in power. And as Trump has made clear, he could then blame Biden for increasing the borrowing gap. You see what I'm saying? It's a nakedly cynical and hypocritical stunt by Donald Trump. He literally wants to have his cake and eat it too. I shouldn't say literally. He metaphorically wants to have his cake and eat it too. And it's incredibly disgusting. It's incredibly disgusting. And it would be foolish of Democrats to reward Trump's bad faith with this sort of capitulation. So my hope is that they absolutely will not go along with it. Now, with all that in mind, let's go back to the notion of a government shutdown. So, according to CBS News, what happens if there's a government shutdown? If the federal government shuts down, many government workers will be furloughed. Although those providing essential services such as law enforcement and air traffic control will continue to report to their jobs. However, none of those federal workers would get paid until Congress approves new spending bill. After the shutdown ends, workers will receive retroactive paychecks covering the days they were furloughed or had to work without pay, according to the Office of Personnel Management. That could create hardship for government workers, as occurred during a shutdown that stretched for more than 30 days when Trump was in office, starting on January 22nd, 2018. During that stoppage, many federal workers turned to food pantries and other forms of aid to get through the several weeks they didn't receive paychecks. Social Security affected by a government shutdown. 67 million Social Security recipients would continue to get their checks even if the government closes for business. Even so, Social Security's administrative budget is discretionary, which means it needs approval from Congress. As a result, some services offered by the Social Security Administration could be impacted in a shutdown, such as benefit verification and new applicants for benefits. Okay, that's important. With millions of Americans affected to travel over the holidays, there are plenty of questions about how a shutdown could impact air travel. Because they provide essential services, air traffic controllers and TSA agents would be required to work without pay. However, there could be significant delays and longer wait times for travelers at airports across the country based on what occurred during previous shutdowns, the Department of Homeland Security warned last year ahead of another potential shutdown. So this could indeed affect you at the airport, say if you have to travel for the holidays, which is very common. Does the USPS deliver mail in a government shutdown? Yes, because the USPS is an independent agency. In previous shutdowns, operations have continued. This means mail would still be delivered and post offices would remain open. So that's good for USPS. Does the military get paid during a government shutdown? Active duty members of the military and federal law enforcement would continue to work, but would not be paid until government signs off on new spending. Most civilian personnel working for the U.S. Department of Defense would be furloughed. Veterans Affairs and the Defense Department are expected to alerting workers about government shutdown protocols on Thursday. The impact would likely be felt in the first week of January when the first military paychecks of 2025 will be deposited, which are to include a 4.5% pay increase for all troops. So this could affect national security too, and I thought government was supposed to care about that. What closes in a government shutdown? Many services will be put on hold or delayed if there's a shutdown, including environmental and food inspections by the EPA, USDA, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, national parks, and other things as well. How long? I mean, folks, the bottom line is this is insane, and it's unnecessary. It's totally unnecessary. We don't need to go through this, and the only reason we are is because Donald Trump and Elon Musk and MAGA Republicans threw a wrench in this, a bipartisan negotiated stopgap measure, and then Trump took that bad situation and made it so much worse by saying, also, I need you to climb this insurmountable mountain and get the debt ceiling increased. And again, President Biden and the Democrats absolutely should not do that. They should not do it. Now, what's Trump's thoughts on the shutdown? Well, according to Jonathan Karl on ABC, who talked with Trump recently, there won't, quote, this is from Trump, there won't be anything approved unless the debt ceiling is done with. He wants the debt ceiling eliminated or extended. Well, if we don't get it, then we're going to have a shutdown. But it'll be a Biden shutdown because shutdowns only inure to the person who's president. Except not really. And Jeff Stein, another reporter, says Trump actually thinks the government shutdown will be blamed on Biden. He should ask Newt Gingrich about that. It's going to land squarely and rightly on Republicans, and particularly him. Now listen, there's no way to predict exactly because none of us are psychic. But I will say, according to the polls during previous government shutdowns, which have mostly been triggered by Republicans, Republicans have taken the blame no matter who's in the White House. When government shutdowns occurred under President Clinton, and it was because of House Republicans, Newt Gingrich, Republicans were blamed for it. When government shutdowns occurred because of Senate Republicans during the Obama administration, despite the fact that Obama was a Democrat like President Clinton, President Obama wasn't blamed for it. Republicans were. When Donald Trump was president, and he and the Republicans triggered a government shutdown, Donald Trump and the Republicans were blamed for it. So it seems to be one of the few times, historically speaking, that the American people actually recognize who is responsible for a bad situation. Now, Trump defies political gravity all the time, so I suppose it's possible that he would dodge this one too. But it is very likely that if he follows through with this, he and his party will get the blame for it. And Democrats should act in every possible way to make sure that the American people recognize literally 100% of this, the fault of Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and MAGA Republicans. Democrats should not bail out the Republicans on this. They should say, we had a bipartisan deal. You can come back to the table and agree to the terms that we had. But otherwise, we're not saving you from yourselves. And they should they should stand firm, close ranks, and use all of their messaging power, which unfortunately so often is so weak, and make sure that the Republicans accrue a political consequence for this. That's my position. But we have so much more to talk about, but we're going to do it in separate videos. But in the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.